Haunted Houses of America Part 2 Number 1. The Haunting of the Sallie House, Kansas. In the quiet town of Atchison, Kansas, there sits a modest, unassuming house on 5008 North 2nd Street. The small, two-story home looks ordinary by day, but as the sun sets and the shadows stretch long, a sinister energy clings to the air, one that has terrified those who dared to live within its walls. This is the tale of the Sallie House, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead seems to blur. It all began in the early 1990s when Tony and Deborah Pickman, a young couple searching for a fresh start, moved into the Sallie House. They had heard rumors of the house's eerie past, but like many before them, they dismissed it as folklore. Little did they know that their new home would soon become the center of a terrifying ordeal. The first strange occurrences were subtle: cold spots, flickering lights, and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. But it wasn't until they noticed their cat acting strangely, hissing and scratching at invisible forces, that things began to escalate. One evening, as Tony was relaxing on the couch, he felt a sudden, sharp pain in his abdomen. He looked down and saw blood. The source? 4 deep, unexplained scratches, as though a claw had raked across his skin. The scratches didn't just hurt, they burned, as if touched by something far darker than mere human hands. Tony tried to ignore it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent was in the house with them. Soon, the entity, something far more ancient and sinister than they could understand, began to make its presence known more aggressively. They would hear strange whispers in the walls, shadows moving when no one was there, and even furniture being moved in the dead of night. Doors would slam shut without cause, and eerie, disembodied voices filled the rooms. But the most chilling phenomenon of all was the spirit of a little girl named Sallie. Sallie, or at least the entity that claimed to be her, was a young girl, no older than 6 or 7, whose voice would echo through the house. She seemed playful at first, but there was an unmistakable malice to her energy. She would tug at the Pickmans' clothes, whisper to them in the dark, and even scrawl messages on the walls in a child's handwriting. Her voice was high-pitched and innocent, but there was something unnatural about it that made every bone in Tony and Deborah's body shiver. The most terrifying moments came in the form of violent attacks. Tony was scratched, punched, and even pushed downstairs by an unseen force. He would wake up with bruises on his body, often in places he couldn't reach. His hair would be pulled in the night, his arms scratched by invisible claws. Deborah too began to feel the wrath of the spirit, her body bruising as she slept, as though something was holding her down. Desperate for answers, the Pickmans called in paranormal investigators. What they uncovered was enough to make even the most seasoned ghost hunters uneasy. The Sallie House had a dark history, one steeped in mystery and tragedy. Legends told of a doctor who had once lived in the house, conducting experiments on a young girl named Sallie. Some believed she had died at his hands, while others thought the doctor had been experimenting with the boundaries between life and death. Whatever the truth, the restless spirit of Sallie, and whatever dark entity followed her, refused to let go. As more people came to investigate, the haunting grew stronger. It wasn't just Tony and Deborah who suffered. Other visitors were physically attacked, scratched, and even shoved. Some believed that the entity had grown more violent over the years, feeding off the fear of anyone who dared to enter. To this day, the Sallie House remains an infamous location for paranormal investigators. Some say the little girl's spirit still lingers, and that her malevolent energy has only grown stronger over time. The Pickmans eventually fled, unable to endure the constant terror, but they never truly left. The house still whispers their names in the dark, and sometimes, just sometimes, the sound of a child's laughter, or something much darker, can be heard on the wind. The Sallie House stands as a monument to the unknown, a reminder that some forces are not meant to be understood, and some spirits are far too angry to ever rest in peace. Number 2. The Haunting of the Conjuring House, Rhode Island. Nestled on a quiet rural plot of land in Harrisville, Rhode Island, the farmhouse at 1677 Round Top Road seems like any other. Its white clapboard siding and creaky wooden floors might suggest an innocent, old-world charm, but beneath the surface, it harbors a dark and twisted history that has left a trail of terror for anyone who's dared to call it home. This is the story of the Conjuring House, a place where evil wasn't just a haunting, it was alive. In the early 1970s, the Perron family, Mother Carolyn and her 5 daughters, moved into the house, seeking peace and the promise of a new life. The home, though large and picturesque, had a history that the family knew nothing about. The previous owners had left abruptly, and the house had been vacant for some time. No one could have foreseen the horror that would soon unfold. It began with strange sounds, a faint whispering at night, footsteps echoing through the halls when no one was there, and a persistent knocking on the walls. The family tried to brush it off as the house settling, but then the disturbances escalated. Carolyn began to notice strange, cold drafts, even when all the windows were shut. The kitchen cabinets would open on their own, dishes rattling as though something unseen were trying to get their attention. But it wasn't until the terrifying events started to involve the children that the family realized something far darker was at play. The youngest daughter, April, was the first to make contact with the house's malevolent forces. She would play in the cellar, often reporting to her mother that she spoke with a friend who lived in the basement. At first, Carolyn thought April was simply imagining things. Children often have vivid imaginations. But soon, the family began to witness the unexplainable for themselves. Objects would move on their own, books flying off shelves, chairs flipping over, and mirrors fogging up with cryptic messages written in a script that no one recognized. The eerie feeling of being watched grew stronger each night, and the sense of impending dread never left the family's side. One evening, Carolyn awoke to find a figure standing at the foot of her bed, a tall, dark silhouette of a woman. She froze in fear, her breath caught in her throat, but when she reached to turn on the lamp, the figure was gone. Later, the family would learn that the spirit of a woman named Bathsheba Sherman had once inhabited the house. Bathsheba was a woman with a dark past, rumored to have been a witch, accused of sacrificing children and performing dark rituals. She was said to have died on the property, but her spirit, like the house itself, was far from at rest. As the days wore on, the hauntings grew more violent. The temperature in the house dropped drastically, even in the middle of summer, and an overwhelming sense of despair gripped the family. Carolyn would wake up each night covered in bruises, her skin marked with strange, unexplained cuts. The girls' toys would play by themselves, moving across the floors as though something was trying to get their attention. The entity known as Bathsheba, along with other malevolent spirits, seemed to be trying to drive the family out. Desperate for help, Carolyn contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned paranormal investigators, hoping they could rid her family of the terrifying presence that had taken over their lives. The Warrens arrived, sensing the dark energy that clung to the house like a suffocating cloud. The house, they said, was not just haunted, it was cursed. They believed Bathsheba's spirit had been the catalyst for much of the torment, but the house was steeped in a history of death and tragedy that had created a vortex of evil, a place where dark spirits gathered and fed off the fear of the living. The Warrens conducted several investigations, including a harrowing exorcism, but the spirits were relentless. During one of their visits, Lorraine reported seeing a figure, a woman in white, standing near the cellar stairs, her face contorted in anguish. As they continued their investigations, the family endured more violent attacks, and the atmosphere in the house grew more oppressive. Even the Warrens, seasoned investigators of the paranormal, felt the house's power. It was then that the true nature of Bathsheba's curse became clear. Bathsheba, who had lived in the house during the 1800s, had reportedly been responsible for the death of her child, something the local townsfolk had never forgiven her for. They had accused her of witchcraft, and many believed that Bathsheba had used dark magic to curse the land. Her hatred and bitterness continued to simmer after her death, poisoning everything around her, especially the house. Despite the Warrens' efforts, the haunting didn't end immediately. It took time, months, even years, for the effects to dissipate. The Perron family eventually moved out, leaving behind the house that had nearly destroyed them. But the legacy of the Conjuring House remained. Over the years, it would continue to attract paranormal investigators and thrill seekers, each hoping to understand the terrifying power that still lingers within the walls. As for the house itself, it still stands today, a chilling monument to the darkness that resides there. Some say it is now a place of peace, its spirits finally at rest after decades of torment. But others know better. The house is a vessel, a bridge between the living and the dead, and the spirits within will never truly leave. Number 3. The tragedy of Villisca Axe Murder House, Iowa. The year was 1912, and the small, tight-knit town of Villisca, Iowa, was alive with the warmth of early summer. Nestled in the heartland, it was a place where neighbors knew each other by name, where church bells echoed through the streets, and where life moved at a peaceful, predictable rhythm. But that rhythm was shattered on a night that would forever stain the town's history. On the evening of June 9th, Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, attended a Children's Day program at their local Presbyterian church. The family was joined by 2 guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, young sisters who had planned to spend the night at the Moore home after the event. It was a joyous night, filled with laughter and song, as the community gathered to celebrate. The family and their guests returned home around 10 p.m., their house settling into silence as they drifted off to sleep. But the peace of Villisca would soon be shattered by an unimaginable act of violence. The following morning, June 10th, the Moore household remained eerily quiet. A concerned neighbor, Mary Peckham, noticed that the family had not emerged for their usual morning chores. Worried, she knocked on their door. Receiving no response, she called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, who arrived with a spare key. Together, they entered the home and uncovered a scene of horror. All 8 inhabitants of the house had been brutally murdered in their beds. The killer had used an axe, later found abandoned in the home, to bludgeon them to death. The faces of the victims had been covered with clothing or bedding, and all mirrors and glass surfaces in the house had been draped. The killer had lingered after the crime, eating a meal from the kitchen before vanishing into the night. News of the massacre spread quickly, and the small town of Villisca was soon swarming with reporters, law enforcement, and morbidly curious onlookers. Investigators scoured the house for clues, but the crime scene was poorly preserved due to the flood of people traipsing through it. Few key details began to emerge, like: Number 1. The killer likely entered the home before the family returned from church, hiding in the attic until they were asleep. Number 2. The murders were carried out with chilling precision, beginning with Josiah and Sarah's bedroom before moving to the children's rooms. Number 3. Lena Stillinger's body showed signs that she may have woken during the attack, suggesting she fought back. Despite these findings, the investigation struggled to gain traction. No clear motive was established, and the identity of the killer remained elusive. Over the years, numerous suspects were considered. Among them were: Number 1. Frank F. Jones, a prominent Villisca businessman and former state senator. Josiah Moore had previously worked for Jones, but left under tense circumstances to start his own business. Rumors of rivalry and resentment swirled, but no solid evidence linked Jones to the crime. Number 2. William Mansfield, a suspected serial killer with a history of gruesome murders. Some believed he had been hired by Jones to carry out the attack. Mansfield's potential involvement was compelling, but ultimately unproven. Number 3. Reverend George Kelly, an eccentric traveling preacher who had attended the Children's Day program the night of the murders. Kelly was known for his erratic behavior and obsession with the case. He confessed to the murders in 1917, but later recanted. His trial ended in acquittal. Number 4. Transients and drifters. Given Villisca's location along railroad lines, investigators considered the possibility that a transient or drifter committed the crime before disappearing. Despite extensive investigations, no one was ever convicted, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Over a century later, the Villisca Axe Murder House stands as a chilling reminder of that fateful night. Restored to its 1912 condition, the house has become a museum, attracting both true crime enthusiasts and paranormal investigators. Visitors report strange occurrences, footsteps echoing in empty halls, doors opening and closing on their own, and the faint sound of children's laughter. For some, the house is a portal to the past, a way to honor the lives lost. For others, it is a place of eerie fascination, where the whispers of an unsolved mystery linger in the air. But for the town of Villisca, it is a scar that time cannot heal, a haunting reminder of the darkness that once descended on their peaceful community. If you like the video, please like, share, and subscribe. It will encourage us to work more harder and bring you more true stories and facts from across the world. Thank you.